All right, we got a big day today. America, China, Gaza, if you're still with us. Actually, not really. It's just Tuesday, which, as everyone knows, is the worst goddamn day there is. All right, but we got our work cut out for us because, like a good, gifted student, we didn't do all our homework last night because it's not due till 1 p.m., right? So we did read about half of what we need to read, okay, in Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart. And oh boy, this story, some super boring parts, some super funny parts, like unintentionally funny parts, and some fairly interesting episodic action. So what do we got to do this morning? We got to go get some breakfast. We got to go by Kroger. Not excited for the shopping. All right. Then we got to come back, all right, do a little prep for 2 classes this afternoon. And some of that prep includes finishing this story. So what can I say about this story so far? Well, the first thing that jumps out from Chrétien de Troyes' Lancelot, Knight of the Cart, is that, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, both the film version and the written versions, it's episodic, right? So there are lots of stages and phases to the adventure, right? So that's point number one, the sort of biggest takeaway. Remember, structural, thematic. So structurally, right, we're already starting to uncover, right, sort of the underlying schema, okay, behind these Arthurian romances. In particular, both Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, right, and the story of Lancelot and the Cart begin with everyone just, chilling as you do in King Arthur's court, when in comes some random knight from who the hell knows where, and he's like, yo, I got a challenge for you, bro. Who's going to take up my challenge? All right. So that's how the story of Sir Lancelot, so that's how our story of Lancelot begins, with this challenge that's thrown down. And I'm going to be honest, I would have to review the text to remember the exact nature of the challenge, because it's like a little weird, and there's like way too much like preamble exposition in this story, in my opinion. Okay? It's part of the reason it's 80 pages long. It's because this guy Kay, who I guess he works in the king's kitchen, he's just like, well, this challenge comes in, the king's like, oh, a challenge. And everyone in the court's like, oh, what a weird challenge from that creepy knight or whatever. And this guy Kay is like, yo, king, I gotta quit, bro. I'm just gonna quit my job. I'm just gonna go work somewhere else. And the king's like, no, don't quit. Arthur's like, we need you here. You're my boy. You're like my best buddy in the crew. And Kay's like, well, why am I doing the fucking dishes then? He doesn't say that, but maybe it's a little implied. I guess maybe we're supposed to infer that Kay is like a little disappointed that none of these knights took up this challenge from this weird mystery knight who just comes in and throws down the proverbial gauntlet, right? But after some rigmarole between Kay and Arthur, and then Arthur sends his wife Guinevere to talk to Kay, and then Kay is like, well, Guinevere, I'll do it if you get the king to promise to let me have any one thing I want. I'll stay. And Guinevere is like, okay. And then Kay's like, hey, let me ride off and do this challenge that the knight wants me to do. And I think the challenge was the knight gets to take Guinevere into the woods. It's weird. It's we're playing a kidnapping game with Guinevere. So Guinevere's off and gone, and then off goes Kay after Guinevere. And then off goes Gawain and some other knights after Kay, because they're like, yo, Arthur, we just got to go check what goes down in the forest, because this is likely to be Gawain and the other boys were like, we just got to go check this out. We're going to follow behind. We'll ride behind and see what's going on. So then some weird stuff happens before you even really get into the adventure proper. So we're following the POV of Gawain and these other knights as they ride off after Kay, who's gone in the woods. And the first thing that happens is they think they come across, so some things happen, and I can't remember the exact order. They see evidence of a fight in the woods. There's blood and shit on the ground. It's oh boy, some bros have died here. All right. But they also see this knight who is on a really this horse that's about to die. And it does die as soon as the knight gets off it. And this knight comes out of the woods, and he's like, yo, other knights, I need to ask you for a loan or a favor or something. You see this horse I'm on. I see you got a couple extra there. I need you to just give me one of those horses, and I can pay you back, or I'll owe you a favor or whatever. And Sir Gawain, being, the bomb-ass knight that he is take whichever horse you want, bro. I don't care. And then they make a big deal of the fact that this knight doesn't even pick the best horse. He just grabs the one that's closest to him, and he's like, thanks, peace, right? And he rolls back out. Right? And then we're in the woods, and it's unclear if these other knights we see are the same knights. I'm assuming that the main knight in the story is Kay, right? But he's just called the knight from here on out. So we go deeper into the forest and we see that there's like a knight dressed in like full armor. There's a bunch of like blood and shit on the ground. Like people have been dying, I guess. And there's this cart that's being driven by a miserable dwarf, we're told. Not a lot of dwarf love in this story, folks. Not a lot of dwarf love, right? And a cart, I mean, in ancient medieval times, is like the stocks or the pillory. It's like a moving stocks or pillory, you know, where you put your head and arms in at Disney World and take a picture for your grandma. It's like that. It's a traveling wagon of shame. It's the exact antipathy, right, of being like a knight. It's the antipole of that. It's like hell for a knight because your honor is just being drained away as you parade. All right, so Gawain watches, right, as this other knight, this mystery knight, we don't know his name. He's the knight of the cart. Spoiler alert, he's probably Lancelot and probably also gay, right? But the dwarf is talking to this other knight. He's like, "Yo, bro, I'll take you to the queen, but you got to ride in the cart. You know, if you're willing to hop up and ride in my miserable little dwarf cart, then I'll take you to the queen." And this knight hesitates for just a moment, we're told, just a half a second. But his love and his heart is so strong that he gets in that cart, you know, and here we're going to go we're going to go to town. And then Gawain is like, "Yo, hold up, other knight here. Gawain, you may remember me. Kind of a baller, relative of the king, you know, the Green Knight and all that shit. Check out my axe mark, bro. I'm legit." And this dwarf's like, "Well, if you want to get in the cart, I'll take you to the queen too." And Gawain's like, "No thanks. Like, I got this horse. I'll ride behind." And he throws out this interesting little phrase that like, he knew that to trade a horse for a cart was like the worst thing you can do, which is a funny accidental connection, right, with our idiom of like putting the cart before the horse. So here we go. We're going to ride into some town. We got the knight in the cart, probably Kay, probably a dude named Lancelot. The miserable little dwarf is driving it because all dwarves in this world are miserable, all right? And then we got Gawain riding behind on his horse, all right? So now we're heading off to the adventure proper. Okay, so they get to some castle town, and the dwarf is like, "All right, we're here, get the fuck out." I mean, he doesn't say that, but like, the dwarf, understandably so, because he's a miserable little wretch, just like doesn't have much time for these nightly games. So like, he gets there, they unload the cart, right? The one knight gets out of the cart, the other knight gets off his horse, and they go up to see like, I don't know, like the noble people that live in this gated town. And this is where it gets interesting, because this knight who's been riding the cart, he does get just like hella negged by this lady of the castle for being a shameful knight who is riding in a cart. But he gets to come sleep with like the knights and the noble people. So it's an interesting case where like being in the cart didn't like shame him out of high society. It's just sort of like, you know, he voted Republican and now like everyone in the castle is just going to fucking rip on him because he's trash. Okay, so the two knights, which is Gawain and the knight of the cart, get up in this castle, and there's like a beautiful woman there to meet him. And she's like, "Oh, wonderful. We got some knights here. We got a good knight and we got a piece of shit knight that I just saw riding in the cart. You ride in that cart, you piece of trash? Well, both of you can come in and have dinner. You can spend the night here. But neither one of you can sleep in the like good bed. See, there's 3 beds in this room. There's like the really good one over in the corner that you're going to want to sleep in, but you can't, especially not you, knight of the cart, because you're garbage. Right? So you guys can sleep in these other 2 beds, and then you can do, you know, whatever you're going to do tomorrow. But you better not sleep in that special bed, especially not you, trashy piece of shit knight of the cart, because I know you're disgraced." And the knight of the cart is like, "I'm going to sleep in that bed, though." And she's like, "What?" He's like, "I'm going to sleep in that bed. You'll see, I'm going to sleep in that bed." And she's like, "I wouldn't sleep in that bed. You're going to be dead." He's like, "I'm going to sleep in that fucking bed, bitch." And I think maybe we're told again at this point that, like, you know, he doesn't really care because he's so in love with this one unnamed person who might be the queen. Kind of uncertain, but we'll find out later. Right? So there are lots of these. This is like actually kind of an interesting difference in this story from Gawain's story. Several times in this story, the author he doesn't really go fully into the head of the knight of the cart, but he pauses to explain to us how like rapturously in love, to the point of sort of like cognitive obsession this knight is. We'll see this come up over and over again, where this knight is just like so in love with the nameless woman that he's in love with that it's affecting his decisions as a knight. But he's going to sleep in this nice bed, all right? And then he gets in his bed, and I can only describe what happens next as like, when you were a little kid, did you ever like try and set up booby traps for like your friends or family? And like you maybe thought they were cool booby traps because you were like 5, but really they were just like shit and they like weren't going to trap or scare anyone? That's kind of what happens in the middle of the night. There's like a lance that's like hanging over the bed, and in the middle of the night, the lance comes down and like almost stabs him. And then I think there's like a little fire that starts up. But it's like a very clumsy, clunky booby trap. And the Knight of the Cart, because he's a G, all right, just easily evades it. And then we're told that like he like cleans up the fire a little bit and just like goes back to sleep. Like, yeah, whatever. I told you I was going to sleep in this goddamn bed. You know, and in these stories, like a maiden is a woman who hasn't had sex yet. Or probably more accurately, a woman who hasn't been caught having sex yet. And that's the kind you want in these stories. Those are the good ones. So there's this maiden in the woods, and they come up to her and they're like, hey, we're trying to find the queen. Have you seen the queen go by? And this maiden's like, guys, the queen's gone by, but she's gone to this other kingdom with this weird, unpronounceable French name nearby, and like, no one that goes in there ever comes back. So, she's probably kind of gone. And they're like, listen, like, we're knights, okay? So just tell us the way to get in there and we're going to handle it. She's like, well, if I tell you the way to go, will you owe me a favor forever and ever and all time? And they're both like, yes, absolutely, we will, maiden fair. And she's like, all right, fine. Well, here's the deal. There's this like water bridge that is like confusingly both under and above water, as I describe it. Probably a little bit of a riddle, right? That's one path. And then there's this bridge of swords. That's the second path. But neither path is great. Okay, thinking back to our Odyssey, this is a little bit of Scylla and Charybdis, yo. Okay, or Scylla, how do we say that? Scylla, Charybdis. The Hydra thing that's going to eat all your men, or the whirlpool, the big vagina in the ocean that's going to suck them all down because women are the worst. All right, but that's the choice they have, all right? Which one of these bridges? And Gawain is like, one of them throws to the other one. I forget which one, but one of the knights throws to the other one. It's like, well, I don't care which path I go down because I'm a G. So why don't you just pick the path? And then I'll take the other path that you don't pick. And the second knight is like, oh, God, well, since you've asked me where to go for lunch, I can't demur. So I guess I'm going to say I'll go to Taco Bell, a.k.a. the water bridge, and you can take the sword bridge. So these two knights split up great. And now we're going to follow the Knight of the Cart on his solo adventure, his solo quest to snatch up that queen. Okay, so now our Knight of the Cart is off on his solo adventure, and he's riding up to this ford, like a crossing, like a shallow crossing, right, in a river, stream, right? And he is so caught up in his own thoughts about how much he loves this mystery woman in his head, probably the queen, right, that he does not hear this big-ass hulking knight from the other side of the river call to him 3 times and say, yo, if you step in this water, I'm going to fuck you up, right? Knight of the Cart doesn't hear this 3 times. And his horse just goes onto the water and starts drinking. And this knight on the other side is just like, what the fuck? So he rides over and just bashes the Knight of the Cart. Knocks him out of his horse, flat out in the water. His lance, his shield go everywhere. And this knight's like, I told you what was going to happen if you came in my ford. And the Knight of the Cart is like, that's bullshit, bro. I didn't hear you because I was busy thinking about my lady fair. You've acted dishonorably, and now I'm going to grab you. And this hulking knight is like, what, are you going to grab me? And the Knight of the Cart comes over and like grabs his leg. He's like, yeah, I got you. What now? You're in my grapple. And this guy's like, I'm on a horse. Anyway, they argue for a little bit, and then they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to get back up on their respective horses, right? And they're going to have a joust, right? And the joust does not go well for the Knight of the Ford. Bro gets messed up, right? He loses so bad that he has to agree to be the slave of the Knight of the Cart for all time. But then this woman who's there, because this Knight of the Ford has been guarding some woman he captured, is like, wait, release him as a slave, and in return, I will give you any one favor you ask when called upon. And so the dude's like, yeah, whatever. Knight of the Cart's like, I'll take that deal. You don't have to be a slave anymore. I'm all about this woman. But I don't think he asked her for a favor. I think he just rides off. Okay, so next, the Knight of the Cart. He's in the woods. He comes across another maiden. This maiden's like, hey, I live in this castle by myself, that's not far from here. It's really well protected. Why don't you come, eat and stay with me there? The only condition is you have to have sex with me tonight. And the Knight of the Cart is like, I'm really not into having sex with anyone else except this one person that I'm super in love with. But I am a knight, and you have sort of asked me honorably, so shit. I guess I have to say yes, and it's just going to suck for me tonight when I have to have sex with you, because you're, really beautiful, but, I'm just, into this other person, So off they go to the castle, and she makes him a dinner, and after dinner, she's like, why don't you go hang out in the courtyard for a minute while I go slip into something more comfortable, and get into bed. And the Knight of the Cart's like, okay, great. So he's out in the courtyard, he's burning cigs. He's just like, he's like, I'm going to have to go in and have sex with this bitch. All right. So after it's then been the appropriate amount of time, he goes in. She's not in the bedroom he thought she was going to be in, which was like weird. And then he hears her scream from like another part of the castle. Right? So he's running around the castle and he comes to this room and he goes in, he opens up this door to this room and there's like 6 knights in there. There's like 2 with swords that are guarding the door. There's 3 more with these huge axes inside. And then the 6th knight just has this woman naked and is literally about to rape her in front of this knight. Right? So she turns to the knight of the cart who's in the doorway. She looks past all aggressors. She turns to the knight of the doorway and she's like, don't you want to stop this guy? He's about to take by force what's yours by right. And the knight of the cart, who, let's remember, doesn't even really want to have sex with her, is just like, I've got to defend her. He hesitates for half a second, then he's like, that's so shameful that I hesitated. I should kill myself. But first I need to kill these people and defend her honor. So he comes into the room, all Lancelot style, and he kills a couple of them and disarms the other. And then this woman stands up, naked, let's remember, stands up on the bed and like claps her hands. And the remaining living knights like scurry off out of the room. And she goes, very good, very good. I see you've gotten past my household guard, and now you have truly earned what you came here for. And this knight is like, the fuck? This bitch? Are you kidding me? So she's like, come with me, right? And they go off into like the proper bedroom where she was supposed to be waiting for him anyway. And she gets stripped all down to her camisole or whatever, and she's like lying there on the lounging thing, and he's like, oh my God. So what does he do? He doesn't undress. He just gets into bed next to her and rolls over and faces the wall. Just like some classic passive-aggressive man shit. You know what I mean? And after like 30 minutes or so, she's like, well, I can tell that you're not going to have sex with me. So I guess I'll just let you get a good night's sleep because you were fairly honorable, and I'll go sleep in another room. And the knight of the cart is like, yes, thank you. Okay, and she leaves and he goes to sleep, and end of that segment. And that's right about where I ended reading yesterday. So we're going to pick up from there today. Although I do want to share one other sort of very interesting chivalric tidbit that I pulled from this text. So hopefully you'll see on the screen right now a quotation, right, from this text, okay, this translation of Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart by Chrétien de Troyes, right? And the implication of this quotation to me seems to be that there is sort of this catch-22 for women in these Arthurian romances vis-a-vis, I'm not going to be overly delicate, vis-a-vis rape, all right? So it seems like the choice you have as like sort of a single unguarded woman in this society is if a knight comes along, you can ask that knight for protection. Why would you want to do this? Well, because there's a lot of men, most of the men in this world are not knights, which means they have no chivalric code, which means they might just rape you on the path in the woods, right? But a knight is not allowed to molest or rape a maiden fair, right? Even if she doesn't ask for his protection. However, here's the catch-22. Once you as a maiden have asked for a knight's protection and been taken under his wing, let's think of this woman with the knight at the ford, right? Once you have done that, you have now entered this chivalric game. And here's where the rules get interesting. A knight is not allowed to rape an unprotected woman, but he is allowed to take as prisoner and rape a woman who's being guarded by another knight, right? So as my mother said the other day, you just better pick a good knight. Okay, because if you ask a knight for protection, you're perfectly safe from all the ruffians of the world. But if there's a bigger, stronger knight that wants to rape you, he just has to beat your knight in combat, and then he's allowed honorably to do whatever the hell he wants to you. So, good luck, Arthurian women. Good luck.